I'd like to call to order this special meeting of the City of Cape May Historic Preservation Commission. Special public meeting to discuss the proposed amendment to the local historic district. In compliance with the Open Public Meetings Act of 1975, adequate notice of this meeting has been provided. If any member has reason to believe that this meeting is being held in violation of this act, they should state so at this time. Everyone, please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Judy, may we have a roll call, please?
Ms. Bisagno.
Here.
Ms. Wilson-Stredick.
Here.
Mr. Stevenson.
Here.
Mr. Hammerin. Mr. Testa.
Here.
Mr. Becker.
Here.
Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming and sitting with us today. Hopefully this will be a session where we can all understand a little bit more what HPC does and what we're proposing. So with that as just an introduction and a welcome, I'd like to ask Janice if she could offer us a few words today.
I just want to welcome everyone and say that if, for some of us anyway, if we remember back to the 1960s, early 70s, Cape May was kind of an off-the-beaten-track, sleepy, but to many of us, beautiful little resort, town, community. And I've watched it over the years blossom, not without controversy, with the adoption of the historic preservation standards and the designation as a National Historic Landmark City. Now, most of us have seen in the news, on social media, and other places, Cape May is now rated as, if not the top, one of the top resorts in the country. And that is primarily due to the hard work and the sacrifice and the devotion that we've shown to our historic resources. Those of you who have old homes have been surprised by the amount of time and effort it takes to maintain them. And tonight, we're going to look at just one really small step in continuing to provide a clear and lasting method to preserve our historic resources. So I hope we can all look at this as a way to preserve our shared community. And I just want to thank you for being here.
And the purpose of tonight's meeting?
The purpose of tonight's meeting is to transparently share and discuss the benefits and effects of a more uniform Cape May Historic District map in a way that respectfully engages the community in clarifying the reasons behind these changes and their practical impacts, so that all participants may understand and embrace the value of adopting revised boundaries to protect Cape May's streetscape, provide fair treatment of similarly situated properties, and align with state-encouraged best practices.
Thank you. So before we start, I just have a question for all of you. How many of you in the audience have actually come before HPC or made an application to HPC? So a handful of you folks. Okay. One of the things we're finding is that it's a little bit challenging sometimes to understand what exactly HPC regulates and what it doesn't. So part of tonight's presentation is to try and be as clear as possible about that. And we welcome all of your questions. What I'd like to ask you to do, however, is if you have questions, please write them down on the handout that you were given. If you didn't get one, the handouts are up here on this table. And this clarification presentation, which is on the agenda. Take about 30 to 40 minutes, then we'll take a break. You can hand in your questions, and then we'll reconvene and essentially respond to your questions and open it up for public comment. Okay? So as Janice said, this all pretty much started in 1970 with the work of one human being, Ms. Carolyn Pitts, for whom we can all be very grateful for preserving for all of us the incredible historic character that's unlike any other place in the United States. Of course, as most of you know, Cape May is the only city in the United States where the entire city boundaries are a National Historic Landmark District. That gets confusing because that's not the same as the local historic district. So I'll clarify that in a moment. So what Carolyn did is she submitted an application to the Secretary of Interior and received approval in 1971 for a National Historic Landmark. It wasn't actually codified until 1976. So next year will be the 50th anniversary of Cape May being designated as a National Historic Landmark District. So this is the current zoning overlay, part of the zoning ordinance. So one of the things that's a little different about Cape May than many of the other historic preservation commissions is it's actually a technical term. We are considered a strong HPC because HPC is tied, and their assessments are tied directly to the zoning ordinance, as opposed to just being an advisory committee. So you can see from this map, and I'm sorry that it's at such a small scale. Later, if you want to take a closer look, the existing map has all kinds of little missing teeth and jagged areas that makes it very, very, very confusing in some blocks where you might have neighbors, one house, one property is in the historic district, one isn't. There's even a couple places where one side of the street is and one side isn't. So this process began somewhere between 8 and 10 years ago. I wasn't quite here yet working on this, but there's been a very diligent effort over the last 2 years specifically to modify and amend this rather messy local historic district overlay, and that's what's being proposed tonight. So Paul, our city manager, who's quite a cartographer as it turns out, produced this wonderful map for us that shows in blue all of the properties that are currently within the local historic district. The ones that are shown in orange are the ones that we are proposing be amended and included in this boundary. The green boundary are the city limit boundaries. That is at the national level, why Cape May is considered a National Historic Landmark District of the whole city. But the local historic district overlay is simply a function of zoning. Hence, why we want to modify it are really these 8 points. So, first of all, to clarify and simplify the historic boundary so it's much, much easier to understand, which in fact aligns with what has been recommended to us by the state historic preservation offices as part of national and statewide best practices. It also, by doing so, protects our current historic properties and streetscapes where there is a variation on most of the streets that are being proposed to be amended, where again, different property owners fall in or out of the historic district. So there's a consistency we're looking for that ensures quite a bit more fairness in terms of compliance with HPC standards. But I want to get fairly into depth on that because the amount of standards that are applied to what we're proposing for your properties, because they're all non-contributing, and I'll explain that in a moment, are fairly minimal. We also believe that this boosts the economic benefits of our town in terms of business and tourism, and even in some cases, there was a study done a couple of years ago, property values in the historic district. Enhances our quality of life and character, why we all come here. Why did we buy a house here? Why do tourists come here? And therefore, preserving what attracts both residents and visitors. And in fact, what we are trying to do at HPC is shift a little bit in terms of serving really as, I would say, an institution or a group that is really trying to be in service to you as the community, being the stewards of our cultural and historic resources. So we received a letter from the State Historic Preservation Office And this letter was making the recommendation that the minor discrepancies in yellow that I've highlighted for you folks between the existing boundaries of the locally designated historic district and the recommended boundaries. And they are saying that they are recommending from this survey that what we're proposing tonight be considered and adopted. So with that said, in order to visually bring us all kind of on the same page about some of these jagged edges and missing teeth, Kevin Hammerman, who's one of our commissioners, has gone out gratefully and taken a bunch of photos of only a few of the blocks so we can all understand what the issues are. So Kevin, I'm going to turn it over to you for a few minutes, please.
Sure. Thank you. So just before I get into the pictures, I should just say that there are some principles in planning and design that are work in this that were also, I think, identified by the state. One is, and I'm going to do these in very simple terms, one is to avoid donuts, so to speak. And that's where you have parcels or several parcels that are surrounded by others that are historic in nature or the reverse. So you want a consistency across all of them, that they're all in or they're all out, not this sort of a, piecework, if you will. The second is to avoid what you might see as a sawtooth effect. You can really see it on the map here, and that's where one property's in, the next one's out, the next two are in, the next one's out, the next one's out, the next one's in, the next one's something else. And so it just, that adds to the confusion. And one of the most important parts about avoiding that sawtooth effect is what we call the streetscape. And that's what is, for the person who is visualizing that street, is there a harmony at work on that street? Third one is fill in logical areas, and you kind of see some there in the kind of the middle of the chart there. Try to come up with good, clean boundaries, if you will. As I said, consider the streetscape. Try to make sure that there's a blending of the right kind of properties and the right kind of buildings on it so that there's a harmony in those. And really, probably one of the most important one is avoiding what they call spot zoning, which is where somebody is excluded or included for no logical reason. And I think that's one of the ones we really want to avoid. So with that in mind, this is the 1300 block of New York Avenue. 1300 is the street address, not the block on the map. If you want to do that for reference, it's block 1147 and 8. So as you come out New York Ave, it's sort of let me think, 1, 2, 3, fourth one in would be that set of properties. And if you look at the picture up there, you can see that there's a combination of homes. Some are historically contributing, most likely, some are not. And it's that nice mix, actually, of houses that oh, certainly, sorry. As you look at the houses, you can see that some are most likely historic. They're contributing properties. Some are likely not. But they blend together incredibly well, and that is one of the streetscape pieces that we're trying to preserve with this. And then the other is, as you look at the 1300 block of New York Ave, the piece that is not in the historic district is actually surrounded by historic properties, already historic properties. So that's the donut phenomena that I think we're trying to avoid. The next one is the 1000 block of New York Ave, so the one right as you come off of Madison. And again, you can see some really very nice and interesting art blending of older homes and newer ones. The one in the upper right-hand corner is clearly one of the newer ones. Some of the others are more in the historic nature. If you look at the map, again, what you can see is as you start down the 1000 block, the ones on the left are outside the map, the ones on the right are inside the current map, then they reverse. And so it starts to become an illogical kind of a configuration, and what you're trying to do is just finally say, you know what, it makes sense that all of the properties fit in the district and should harmonize with that. The next one, this is the 900 block of Sewell. As you look at Sewell sort of sits almost right at the fulcrum of the triangle there, where you have Washington and Lafayette coming down, you have New York and New Jersey coming over this way, and then you have Madison Avenue that comes into that. And you can see there's a little section of orange kind of there in the middle. At some point, you have to say, are you in or out of the map? And what we said is we have better continuity in the map by including those areas. Again, they are very much a mixture of old and new. So we included that in the construct of the map. And the last one is the 1200 block of Washington Street. So these are houses that are between East and West Streets. You can kind of start around Tim Kerr Realty and continue as if you're going out of the city. Again, they're a very interesting set of houses. You have Tim Kerr Realty, the second one on the top from the right. From the right. You have 3 houses on the top next to that. They're all historic properties. On the lower level, you have the first 3 from the left to the right. Those are what really almost looks like reproduction Victorian houses. Very nicely done. Actually, all 4 of those are probably that. The fourth one, the lower right-hand corner, may have been a remodeling of a formerly historic property. So our objective as we think about these is, one, continue to create some uniformity in our thinking about the streets, make sure that the streetscape works properly so that you can see this nice clean blend of historic and non-historic properties. And part of that, the reason to do that, is something that John had on his chart earlier, and that's if you don't think about the streetscape, you can have a set of houses that are all looking like they belong there and one that suddenly does not. And when that happens, then the streetscape is really negatively impacted. And so again, our efforts here are to try to blend some ones that are in it, some ones that are out of it, make sure there's some I'll call it, not uniformity, but at least harmony with that. And that way we get, I think, a much better map to work with.
Thank you, Kevin. So one of the things we're trying to avoid are things like this. So I just did a random little search from a local town that we all know of new construction. And this is all stuff that's been built within the last couple of years. If we don't harmonize our local historic district boundaries, not that one of you guys would want to do this, but one of your neighbors could sell their property, somebody could move here and build anything like this, and we would have absolutely no regulatory ability to prohibit that from happening as long as it met with zoning. So it's one of the things we're deeply concerned about. So the rest of this presentation, with the exception of the last 2 slides, are all about what are the practical impacts of this on your property. So how many of you have taken a look at this document? Great. So this was about a 2-year effort to create the historic design standards that hadn't been looked at since the 90s and update them. And this became published and part of the zoning ordinance last September, or September a year ago. So notice, if you are doing any interior renovations, no impact at all. If you're doing ordinary maintenance and repair, again, no impact at all. And I'll show you the definition of ordinary maintenance and repair in a moment. And any work done on an improvement that is not an addition and does not change the exterior appearance also does not need to come before HPC in any way. Furthermore, and most importantly, I would say that every one of the properties that is being proposed for inclusion in the amended local historic district map is non-contributing. So what non-contributing means is these 3 last bullet points. I'm not going to read them to you. Basically wasn't built in the period of significance, or it's been altered so much that it no longer has historic value. And where this is determined is there are property reports that are done on a cyclical basis of virtually every property in Cape May. And it's a historic architect or historian who determines whether the house, home, property is contributing or not contributing. So if you look at these standards, virtually every one of the components of these standards separates what the regulations are for compliance of contributing versus non-contributing. And by far, the least restrictive is non-contributing. There's I'll go through with the impacts of each of these in quite a bit of detail over the next 15 or 20 minutes. So that's a really important realization, is all of your properties currently are non-contributing. So what's maintenance and repairs? So this is the definition right out of the zoning ordinance, section 525-34. And you can see that if you're doing any maintenance and repairs, so long as you're using in-kind materials and quality workmanship and having the same appearance, anything that's deteriorated that you need to repair, you don't need to come before HPC, because that's considered by definition ordinary maintenance and repair. Therefore, no HPC, what's called a certificate of appropriateness, is required. So when you do make an application to HPC, what's required by zoning, if an application is required, is that you get what's called a certificate of appropriateness. Again, in the cases of what I just showed you on the last slide and ordinary maintenance and repairs, no such certificate is necessary, hence no application is necessary, therefore no process with HPC is brought to bear on your property. Then there's a subset of applications that are called minor applications. Again, this is straight out of the zoning ordinance. Minor application is defined by, again, zoning ordinance section 525-34. If it doesn't involve demolition, relocation, or removal, it's a minor application. If it doesn't involve an addition or new construction, it's a minor application. I would say the vast majority of applications we see are minor applications. Things like installing new fences or replacing a fence, signs, lighting, doors, windows, roof replacement, paving, exterior sheathing, or streetscape, as Kevin just talked about. What a minor application means is that we have a subcommittee of 3 of us that meet in this room every Tuesday morning. All you need to do is give Judy a call over here, and you can make an appointment to speak with us if you want to. If you don't want to speak with us and you feel perfectly happy that, yep, all we're doing is taking this fence that we already have and extending it, as long as it meets the zoning requirements, which are separate from HPC. We do not regulate zoning requirements, such as 6-foot-high fence is permitted only from the back of the house to the back of the property and along the back of the property. That's zoning stuff. That's not us. But let's just say you wanted to extend your fence, and you simply wanted to take a fence that's similar to what you already have and meets what are shown as fences in our standards. All you need to do is submit that application, and it will get approved more than likely in review on Tuesday morning. You don't even need to come and speak with us, but if you want to, you can. More about that later, because what we're trying to do with those Tuesday morning meetings is provide as much interface and interaction with everybody in town as possible on any kind of ideas you have about what you'd like to do to improve your property. So let's go through each of these. So that means that there's no public hearing required. And again, the subcommittee likely can approve those pretty readily, and that's the vast majority of what we see. So that takes us then to what are the standards within this document that may affect you if, let's say, you want to replace a door or your windows or a fence or some driveway paving. So let's start with fences. So very simply, for non-contributing properties, what is not permitted are aluminum or vinyl fences. And as long as it doesn't visually adversely impact the streetscape, it'll be fine. A couple of minor things. So a lot of these fences have a structural component, like a horizontal component, like a picket fence to which the verticals are attached. That horizontal component needs to face your property, not the street. And, of course, privacy fences are not permitted in the front yard. Doors. So very simply, a door that is of the historic character, but it does not need to be of historic materials for a non-contributing property. In other words, composite vinyl aluminum doors may absolutely be appropriate. But again, these images are straight out of our standards. All those doors on the bottom there are fairly modern doors. That would be something that would adversely affect the streetscape. Windows. So this gets a little complicated because if you're a contributing property, there are some pretty stringent requirements for what the windows need to be. A non-contributing property, not really. They just need to be compatible. So for example, if there is for you want to have muttons. So a mutton is a separation in one of the sashes. So for example, this window that's being depicted here would be referred to as a 2/2 window. There are 2 lights in the top sash and 2 lights in the bottom sash. That vertical member is called a mutton. What the standards for non-contributing properties are, it can't just be a stick-on piece of plastic. It actually has to be on both the inside and outside. Again, if you're simply replacing windows, does not require full review by HPC, and large picture windows, big, large, expansive pieces of glass, which we don't see in Cape May, would not be appropriate, and the specific language here is they're strongly discouraged. Furthermore, if you're doing any storm windows over top of your existing windows, that's fine. It's just that they can't be raw aluminum. They would need to be painted. In other words, raw metal is considered inappropriate. So the kind of limitations on things like window replacements for non-contributing properties are really, really quite minimal, and probably something you would be doing anyway. Same thing with roofs. So if you are replacing a roof, asphalt shingles on non-contributing properties, absolutely acceptable. Imitative roofing materials, absolutely appropriate for non-contributing properties. The only consideration here in the inappropriateness on the bottom is that if it's a standing seam metal roof, it needs to be of a residential scale if it's a residential property, as opposed to a commercial scale. So what that means is standing seam metal roofs have different heights of the standing seams. What we would find appropriate is no higher than 1 inch. And also you can see that on the ridge, on the image in the lower right-hand corner there, that major piece of channel over top of the ridge, which looks like a commercial roof, would be considered non-appropriate. But of course, a standing seam metal roof as depicted in the middle and the bottom there is absolutely acceptable. Paving for driveways. Well, the classic here in Cape May is bluestone, brick, concrete pavers are acceptable, crushed shells. The only thing that's not acceptable in the historic district would be black asphalt or large concrete slabs. So again, these are all depicted on or in our standards in the standard book. So for example, the pavers on the right-hand side, in the middle there, those are concrete pavers, fairly inexpensive relative to some of these other materials, and absolutely are considered appropriate. The only issue here is with regard to parking. The diagram that's shown in the upper right-hand corner there indicates that parking spaces required by zoning in the historic district cannot occur in front of the front facade of the house. Side yard, backyard, fine, but not in front of the house. The purpose of that is, of course, so that when folks are walking as pedestrians through the streetscape, this is part of the streetscape, is so that folks aren't seeing cars right in front of all of these houses. Porches. So this gets slightly into additions. Again, if you wanted to add a porch, composite materials are absolutely acceptable. Vinyl lattice work. The only real issue here is if you're building a porch and the porch is raised up above grade level on piers, that the voids between the piers simply have a vinyl lattice in them as depicted on the lower right. Okay. Demolition is one of those issues that is fairly substantive. There are, if you are not proposing lifting up and relocating the structure, there are 7 criteria by which demolition would be assessed, and these are the 7 issues. I'm not going to read them. They're right in the zoning ordinance. They're actually not in HPC's documents. This is the zoning ordinance. So if you wanted to demolish a structure on your property, it would be assessed against these 7 criteria. I'm sorry? Oh, yeah, and that would require a hearing. So henceforth, henceforth in the presentation, additions and new construction would require an HPC hearing. If you're going to put on a large addition or any addition of new construction, or demolish the house or whatever structures on the property and propose a new structure, that would need to come before the HPC at a public hearing. So with regard to what is, again, diagrammed for you pretty clearly, I hope, in these standards are some issues associated with appropriate additions and new construction. There are two primary issues and two other issues, so four issues essentially. One is development patterns and site placement. So you can see that one of the things that we'd be looking for is a sort of alignment, if you will, within a reasonable assessment of the front yard setback. Now, the front yard setback is established by zoning. But for example, if there is a street that has all the other houses that are pretty close to the front yard and you have a deep lot, taking the house and placing it very deep on the lot and leaving a large open space to the street would probably be considered inappropriate because it wouldn't be in alignment with the development patterns and site context of that streetscape. Same thing with regard to parking, again, as shown on the bottom in this diagram. Furthermore, the same thing happens, or the same principle is associated with the mass, height, proportions, and scale of what it is you're proposing. So for example, the top slide shows, obviously, the one in the middle would be, as depicted in red, inappropriate. If, for example, there is a very consistent height, massing, and proportions, such as the cottages on Gurney. If one of those ever burned down, for example, taking and putting let's say a flat facade, rectilinear, as depicted in red in the middle line there, would be considered inappropriate. And then lastly, if the scale and mass of this new construction should at least be somewhere in the vicinity of the scale and mass and context of that existing street and streetscape. Hence, back to the beginning of the presentation, why we're concerned about the ability of someone to come in and knock down what's adjacent to an historic house and be able to build something like any one of those in any of these three lines if the property adjacent to yours is not included in the historic district. Again, just a reminder, these are the kind of things we're trying to avoid here. So, two more issues with regard to additions and new construction. Architectural features. So what I've done here is I've tried to hide, by the way, this is right out of the standards. So this is a screen capture right out of our standards. So, by the way, these standards are available online at HPC's website. You can download a PDF file at no cost. You can buy a hard copy. I believe it's from Amazon, right, Judy? Amazon. Yep. So, for example, a few things. What we're looking for, and so, for example, this first one, the rhythm patterns of windows, etc. So, for example, if you look at the bottom right-hand corner here, and you're on a street that has far more, I would say, regular fenestration patterns that have a window-to-wall ratio that's greater than this, I mean, that would be a context within which that bottom right-hand image would be inappropriate. Again, the same thing with scale and proportion. We just talked about that. And same thing with windows and doors, which I've already gone through. Flat roofs would not be appropriate in the historic district, simply in Cape May. Those flat roofs were simply not part of the historical context and history of Cape May. Porches that are compatible in massing details. So again, what we're looking for is, if you want to build a new porch, that's fine. Just the scale of it should be appropriate for the neighborhood. And one way to do that is to go and look at the neighboring houses on your street and bring an image or two of those to us and show us and say, hey, this is what the context and scale looks like of the streetscape. We are in the best to which we can as designers, you as the applicant, are attempting to replicate or at least be consistent with or cogent with that context. Same thing with oversized dormers. So all over Cape May are all kinds of different shapes and sizes of roof dormers. But a dormer, for example, that was the entire width of a roof and therefore would likely require either a big shed roof or a very unsteep sloped gable roof would also be inappropriate because it wouldn't be consistent with the scale, proportion, and context of the streetscape in the historic district. Lastly, with materials, this is a really interesting one because, again, if it's a contributing house or property, HPC is fairly stringent about what materials are appropriate and not. They're all clearly defined in the HPC design standards, but if it's a non-contributing house, which are, again, to repeat, all the houses that are being proposed for inclusion, materials such as, well, we call them synthetic materials. So synthetic materials that are not wood, for example, are absolutely acceptable. Of course, authentic materials would be preferred, but not required. So to close this out, before we take a break, I would like to repeat that and invite all of you at any time to come and speak with us on Tuesday morning. Those sessions have three primary purposes. Number one, all of the applications that come before HPC are reviewed by our subcommittee, and we determine on Tuesday mornings, based upon the application, is it complete or not? Do we need to see more information in order to assess compliance? Second, can we approve it right now? And I would say the majority of what we see on Tuesday mornings, if it's a complete application, has its checklist and the proof of payment of taxes and the other things that are on our checklist for submission, it very likely can get approved if it's appropriate that Tuesday morning without needing to go any further. Done. However, there are also, and this has been happening more and more frequently, I would say 6 months ago, we might get folks coming on Tuesday mornings maybe twice a month. Now we're having folks, I'd say 3 or 4 folks coming to visit with us every Tuesday morning. And folks will come and, for example, say, hey, you know, we're thinking about putting a porch on our house. This is what we're thinking about. What do you think? And so therefore, we kind of become partners in a way, co-creators of whatever it is that the applicant is trying to do. And what our job is to try and help them do what they want to do within, I would say, the restraints of our HPC design standards. So we'll make recommendations. Hey, you know, if you want to meet our standards, maybe what you might want to consider is a balustrade that looks more like this. Or if somebody's proposing, for example, a steel railing in the historic district with stainless steel cables, which happens sometimes, we would say, no, that's not appropriate, but here are some other ways you might want to think about it. And in some cases, and actually quite often, what we're proposing back to folks is actually even less expensive. Furthermore, folks will come to us and say, you know, I've got this lot and I want to build this house. So they'll bring a whole set of either design drawings or even just sketches. And these can be informal. There's no cost for this. It's just an open discussion. And essentially, it's a resource for the community for folks to be able to come and get free advice, I'll call it, from folks on HPC about how you might be able to accomplish what you're trying to accomplish and do so in compliance with our standards. So, to close this part out, the process for amending the local historic district map is outlined as a 3-step process. We sent all of you folks who are being affected potentially by this for inclusion a letter that described much of what I talked about tonight, but not in as much detail in terms of specific impacts. But also at the very end of that letter, thanks to our solicitor, Chris Gillenschwartz, a clearly delineated 3-step process. So the first step is for HPC to recommend an amendment to the local historic district map, hence we're here tonight. If we choose to recommend that map and that amendment, it goes before the planning board. The planning board will then conduct their own public hearing to vote on the amendment. If they choose to vote affirmatively on the amendment and approve it, then the amendment will be sent to City Council for adoption by ordinance. And I think there's a 2-step process within that as well. So you're probably tired of hearing me yak. I'm done. But to close this out, what I'd like to do is ask Janice to be our bookend this, because what we've done twice this year so far is all of us as the commissioners of HPC have conducted 4-hour workshops here, trying to really get clear on what it is that our role in serving this community is, and really try and shift that in a way that I described earlier. But I think that this purpose statement, which took us pretty much all of one day to align around. So these words are very specific. What our role really is, and if you look at it, it's kind of divided into 3 different little statements. So not unlike the purpose statement for the meeting, the first little clause is what is it that we're trying to do? The second little clause is how are we trying to do it? And the third is why. So what, how, why? Or function, what's then the being state or energy or spirit that we're trying to constantly regenerate. And then lastly, what's going to build all of our will in a community to be in service to really, I'll say, stewarding the historic and cultural resources, which I don't know about you, but I would suggest that maybe that's why you chose to buy a house here. It's certainly why I did. So with that said, Janice, could you please read to us what the purpose of HPC's work is, and then we'll take a break.
The purpose of the HPC's work is to serve as a catalyst for guiding and valuing Cape May's historical, cultural, and natural resources in ways that inspire and unite our community to steward these resources for the benefit of all, so that present and future generations continue to express the unique quality of life in this place we love.
Hey, we did that in 40 minutes. Not bad. So,
Which for you may be a record.
it may be a record. Wait a minute. Never mind. So what I'd like to ask you to do is take a minute or two, and if you have any questions that you would like us to respond to, write them on the little handout we gave you. I would like to suggest that we take a 10-minute break. Anybody who has any questions, if you could take them and please put them on this table. We will respond to all questions, and then we'll open it up for public comment, and we'll reconvene at 5 minutes of 5. Does that sound good? Thank you very much.
So, I mean, whatever this is what the city.
These are the city lots, not the address. So this I know is something, so I'm guessing, I would think there's. So you can see it's kind of right.
This is their map. We just call it in. That's weird though, you know? Maybe hopefully you're not being taxed more. You know? I'll bring it to the attention of the chair. Maybe we could send something that shows you that
I've had to learn all this like
You want to switch? Because here's mine.
we're just calling it. So it's basically filling in all the blanks.
Well, mine already is in it. This is my house here, and yours is the house. And my house is tiny kids not on it.
It's good to have money. Yeah.
And then they just put this one on Queen Street. With that
Ma'am?
variance, how did they
Let's, excuse me, let me get that hot number again from you, and I'll write it down and I'll bring it to the chair. And it's lot 1087?
Lot 1087,
Okay.
Block 1087, Lot 18.
Oh, so it's block 1087. And lot?
18. Last name is Pop, B-U-C-K. It's supposed to be 9/11 Republic.
It's supposed to be what, 911?
9/11 Republic.
Oh, okay.